Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to be talking about two-factor authentication today, specifically diving into some of the options that you have for different types of two-factor authentication as you implement it for your companies as developers. With anything like security, there's going to be a trade-off between the level of security and the usability for your end users. And so we're going to be discussing a lot of those trade-offs and some of the different things that you want to keep in mind as you implement the different options that you have available. So I thought my talk title was pretty clever, but then my coworker Matthew came up with this for a 2FA talk that he gave. Fortunately, I made stickers, so I have stickers available for this after the talk if you come find me. I'll be at the Twilio booth. So once again, my name is Kelley Robinson. I do work at Twilio. How many of you are Authy users or have heard of Authy? Cool, that's like a good number of people in the crowd. So Twilio acquired Authy about 5 years ago, and I work on our APIs for things like adding two-factor authentication into your apps. So we support a few different methods for this. And so I also spend a good amount of my time talking to the developer community about security, specifically around authentication. And this talk is going to incorporate a lot of the things that I have learned in the last 2 years of like talking to developers and customers of ours about some of the challenges that they have when implementing 2FA. This is not going to be a talk about like Authy or Twilio, but like I've learned a lot in that time about how people think about 2FA and the security challenges that they have. So let's first talk about some of the commonalities of what we're building and walk through a few assumptions for our system, specifically why we even need authentication. So for our authenticated system, we have this assumption that the user has something of value tied to their account, right? If they didn't have that, or if it wasn't either tied to their account or if it wasn't valuable, we might not need the authentication in between the value and the human. We also hope that the user can only access that value once they have proven that they are who they say they are. And that is the authentication process that we normally go through. But the other thing that can happen here is that a successful impersonator could also access that value. This is known as account takeover, sometimes called ATO. And a lot of what we're going to be thinking about today is how to make this step not worth it for the attacker. So anybody that has enough motivation and funding can probably hack into your accounts. The thing is like, it's not always going to be a nation state actor that's trying to hack into your Twitter account, right? Like that might be the case if you're a high profile individual, but there's so much that comes into this that's based on the perceived value of the account that they're attacking and how much effort that's going to take them to do that. So if we increase the level of effort, even if it's something of high value, there might not be the incentive there to make it worth their time to attack your account. And that's a lot of what authentication systems help to do, is just make this not worth it. It's not to make it impossible, like we have to make this usable for people, but it's to make it not worth their time. So the whole reason that account takeovers are currently possible is primarily because we use passwords for authentication. And passwords are weak, right? Passwords are often short or guessable. Things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And people reuse passwords all over the place. And so this is problematic because there's attacks known as credential stuffing, where if some account that you had a password in 6 years ago, like Adobe, gets hacked, which they did. If you were using your Adobe password for a different account that you have, now people have access to that password and credential set, and they might try to use that in other accounts around the web. And so they might try to hack into your bank account, or log into your email account, or your Apple account, and buy expensive things or transfer themselves money. This is known as credential stuffing, and so this is a very common attack. And so additional factors help to prevent this, but passwords make this very possible right now because so many passwords are weak and reused. So you may hope that like nobody is actually using this password. Nobody is using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Unfortunately, about 23 million people are. And so this is according to the website Have I Been Owned. Has anybody gone to this website? So if you haven't checked out this website, I really encourage you to do it. It's from a security researcher named Troy Hunt. So he basically takes all of those data breaches, like the Adobe breach and that kind of thing, and puts them in a usable form online for consumers so that you can go in there and you can put in your passwords or your email address and see what breaches your email address has been seen in. You can also set it up so that you get alerts if your account is seen in a new data breach. And so this is a really good way that if you are somebody that reuses passwords around the web, you know that you need to go change your password for both the site that was breached and any other sites that might have been using that password. So what can go wrong with all of this, right? So there can be compromised factors. We've already talked about some of the ways that passwords can be compromised, but there's other ways that we can compromise additional factors in this process and additional authentication systems. So hacking, guessing, brute forcing, that kind of thing, and then phishing. If you are not familiar with phishing, that's the process of somebody trying to get you to tell them your password by using malicious or lookalike websites, by getting you to click on a malicious link in an email that they sent you that looks like it might be for your bank account. So they basically recreate the HTML of your bank account, get you to log into their website, but instead of chase.com, it's like myevilwebsite.com, and you didn't notice that the URL was not the same, right? So this is very common. This is a thing that you might think that you're not susceptible to, but attackers are very, very sophisticated when it comes to this kind of stuff. And so, I think we could all be victim to this. I certainly could be, even though this is something that I think about all the time. So when any authentication method is compromised, it often results in financial losses for the end user or for the company who allowed this to happen. And just to put some data behind this, it's a big problem. So this is the cost of account takeover in billions of dollars every year. And so this is getting up into like the $5 billion range. It dropped off in 2015 because that's when chip and PIN was introduced in the US on credit cards. But it's gone back up in the last couple of years. And so this is a $4 billion problem right now. So this is industry-wide. This is, may or may not be a huge problem for your specific business, but this is something that you want to keep in mind because this can result in financial losses and does across the US. And so this is a big part of the reason that we're trying to find more ways to secure and protect accounts. And that's why our strategies for authentication come in. So I've talked about factors. You've heard the term two-factor authentication. To protect our accounts, we need to use one of these types of factors for authentication. There are 3 different types, and using 2 of them is how you add two-factor authentication to an account. And so the 3 types of factors are, 1, something that you know. This is a knowledge factor, something like a password or a PIN. Something that you have, a possession factor. So this could be like a mobile device or a key. And then something that you are. This is an adherence factor. This is often biometric data like retina scans or fingerprints or Face ID or something like that. A very classic example of 2FA in the real world is a debit card and a PIN number. This adds 2 factors for protection. It's something that you have, the physical card, and something that you know, the PIN number. Without, PIN, redundancy. But anyway, without either one of those, you can't just withdraw money from somebody's account, which adds an additional layer of protection, right? So you can, if you find somebody's debit card on the sidewalk, you can't just withdraw money from their account. If you just have their PIN, you can't just go onto the bank and say, I know this PIN, give me all the money. That's not going to do you much good. You need to have both, and that adds additional security. All right, now we're going to look at some specific options for second factors. Most of web authentication right now relies on the knowledge factor, so that's the password. Most often when we talk about adding a second factor, we're usually talking about possession factors, and that's the something that you have. We may see more people using adherence factors, but this gets a little tricky because you don't necessarily want to be storing biometric data on your servers. This is something that Apple can get away with because they only store that data on your actual device. So companies like Google and Apple and device manufacturers, they store data about you on the device, which is good because it's never going to leave the device. If you are a company that decides that you want to do retina scanning for authentication, think hard about that, right? Because you don't want it to be a data leak that says your company leaked retina information for your users, because it's not like you can go change that, right? It's hard to change a password. It's even harder to change your email address. It's hard to change a YubiKey, but you can't really go change your retinas, right? So this is a thing that we want to be considerate about as we're implementing different types of factors. So focusing on the possession factors, most common thing that we see in terms of 2FA for web is SMS one-time passwords. And there's reasons for this. So it's really easy to onboard new users. At this point, almost everybody has a mobile number that can accept text messages. And you don't have to get your users to download a new app. And so this is really great because when you set up an account for somebody, if you ask them for your phone number, cool, they can be enrolled in SMS-based 2FA. This is also familiar for users. We've been doing this for a while now, and so people are familiar with this pattern, and so they're more willing to know what to do and enroll in this method because they know what to expect. Unfortunately, this is not terribly secure. So when it comes to SMS-based one-time passwords, we have something called SS7 attacks. SS7 is the signaling system 7. It came after signaling system 6. Who knew? So it's one of those things that comes into telephony, and just like a very high-level overview of how this works is it's how you are able to keep using your phone when you travel across international borders. And so when I go to Colombia, I'm on the Movistar network there. I'm roaming in Colombia, and Movistar says to Verizon in the US, they're like, hey, we see that Kelley is here in Colombia. Can you route her text messages to us? And Verizon's like, yeah, sure, you're a network that we know. Like, this is cool. This is all based on trust because we built these systems back in 1981. So there's like all these systems of trust that are in place that aren't really based on any kind of like cryptographic signing or anything that's actually very secure. And so what hackers have been able to do is impersonate networks and get legitimate networks to forward your traffic to them. This does require a bit of technical finesse. It's not impossible for a person to do this, but this is not something that we see quite as much as SIM swapping attacks, which is a different type of attack on top of phone numbers. And this is based on mostly social engineering. So a hacker or your ex can call up Verizon and say, hey, I'm actually Kelley, and I want you to send me a new SIM card because I lost my phone. And if they successfully convince Verizon that they are me, and Verizon then sends them a new SIM card, all of a sudden they have access to my phone number. This is incredibly common. We've seen this happen because people haven't secured their mobile accounts well, or because insiders at mobile carriers in the US have actually been part of schemes to do SIM swaps, and they're part of these entire fraud schemes, and they're like getting a cut of the payment for whatever they end up doing. And so this is a problem, right? And we see this happening a lot now, especially to people who are tweeting about how many Bitcoin they own, so don't do that. But this is something that could happen to you even if you're not like a high-profile target. And then finally, like one of the points of SMS-based 2FA is that it's supposed to prove that you have possession of the phone number or the device that that phone number is tied to. But like that's not really true. There's a lot of ways that you can access text messages that aren't like on your phone. There's a lot of web portals that you can log into. You may have text messages synced with your computer. There's a lot of ways that you can access this now, and so it's not really a possession factor. And so there's a lot of security concerns with SMS-based 2FA. So kind of in summary for this factor, it's convenient, but it's insecure. And so, you might want to consider more secure methods of 2FA if you have worries about securing the value of your customers' accounts. The next thing that we're going to talk about is soft tokens, also known as TOTP. This is time-based one-time passwords. And this is a way to generate tokens based on an algorithm. So there's two inputs to this algorithm. The first is a secret key. And so this is what's used when you scan that QR code for adding a token to Google Authenticator or Authy. That is the secret key that is being shared between the server and your device. So the secret key is encoded in that QR code. That's the first input to the algorithm. The second input is the system time, and that's why it's a time-based one-time password. And so both of those inputs get put through a one-way hash function and then truncated to come out to usually a 6 or 7-digit number. And so this is a really neat way to do and generate one-time passwords. It also works offline, which is really nice, so that if you're on an airplane or you're in another country and you don't have access to your text messages, you still have a way to authenticate using the device that you have. And the symmetric key cryptography offers increased security above SMS, but if someone gets access access to that shared secret, then the method can be easily compromised. So this happens because a lot of times, like this happened at my old company, we had TOTP enabled for some of our developer accounts, but they were shared accounts. And so we would store the QR code in our 1Password account. And so that new people that wanted to add the 2FA that needed to log into that could scan that. And so all of a sudden, this is like 2FA, but it's the same secret key that's being shared everywhere. If somebody gets access to that QR code or to the secret key, then they can compromise that account. But the other benefit of this method is that it is kind of app agnostic. It's an open standard. It's based on the RFC. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it means that anywhere that you see something that's like scan this QR code with Google Authenticator, you can use an app like Authy or the Authenticator app of your choice because it's an open standard that are all implementing this like RFC-based algorithm. Unfortunately, this does require a TOTP-compatible app, and not every user can or will install an app. And this is where we start to see some friction from like the customers that we talk to, where we're like, use something more secure than SMS-based 2FA. And they're like, we can't get all of our users to download this, and so we need to fall back to SMS-based 2FA. So this additional friction is what can frustrate users, and one of the reasons that SMS is still popular. I'm not saying that this is right, but like this is something that we consistently see with people that are adding this to their applications. And one of the reasons that I like to inform people that there are more secure options available, but we still see a lot of people adding SMS-based 2FA because not everybody has a smartphone or not everybody will download an application. But overall, this is a pretty good option, and we see a lot of security-conscious companies moving towards 2FA and away from SMS-based 2FA. And as this becomes more common, it's going to be at the point where people already have Google Authenticator, already have Authy installed on their phones, and so they're not going to have that additional friction step. Adding the additional application, scanning that QR code, is going to become less of a friction onto the user onboarding side of things. Another option that we have is push authentication. And so you can kind of see how this works in the diagram there. This is really popularized by Duo Security, if you've ever used that. So this is basically when you start to log in, there's no token that you enter, but instead you get a notification on your device that say, hey, we see you trying to log in. Do you approve this request? And you can either hit approve or deny. And this is great. Like, users love this option because it's so low friction. You can approve this right from your Apple Watch if you have one of those. And that's really awesome because it doesn't require that you go through that extra step. It also uses asymmetric cryptography, which offers additional levels of security above symmetric key cryptography. This means that you have two keys, one of which never leaves your device. So your device is the only one that can actually approve the request. It doesn't have the same option. You can't use this in the same way that we were storing those like shared secrets in my company 1Password account. That isn't true for this. You have to register a new device in order for this to happen, and so every device has to generate its own key pair. This is also the only form of 2FA that adds the option to explicitly deny a login. And so this could be useful feedback if you're doing something that might be risky. Say that you want to actually take action if you get too many denials, or take action even if you get one denial. Unfortunately, this is also so low friction that you could easily approve an authorization request just to get rid of it. So if somebody is trying to hack into your account in the middle of the night, your phone's next to your bed, it's buzzing, it's buzzing, it's buzzing, you're like, oh, cool, yeah, just approve that, like whatever. If you're not really thinking about it, the lack of friction could actually make this too easy for the end user and might make this somewhat less secure because of that. I'm not totally sure how true that is. This is a common criticism of push authentication. I'd like to see some data based on this, but I haven't actually found any of that. And kind of just like a meh thing to consider with this is that it's proprietary. This does require that you have a specific app. So not only does it require the additional app install, but it requires that you have a very specific app because it's not an open standard. And so you need to have an app like Authy or Duo, or bake this into your own application so that you can do that kind of cryptographic verification and key pair generation on the user's device. So this seems great. It's cryptographically secure, which sounds great, but it also might be a little too convenient and still has some of the downsides of the still needs to make the user install an app on their phone. And finally, the last factor that I want to talk about is WebAuthn. And this is the new hotness, and for good reason. So it offers a really high level of security with asymmetric key cryptography like push authentication, but it also is an open standard like TOTP. So the biggest drawbacks of WebAuthn right now is that it's a relatively new technology and it's not super widely available yet. So browsers have all basically implemented this as a technological standard, but you also need an authenticator that's compatible with the standard, and things like YubiKeys work for this, but YubiKeys cost like $50. They're not exactly cheap or reasonable to expect that every end user of your application is going to acquire one. As this becomes more and more common, we're going to see things like Android phones and potentially even iPhones become compatible authenticators. And so once that happens, you'll start to see this become more and more common, and you won't have that additional friction step. But right now, it's not super reasonable to expect that everybody goes out and buys a YubiKey. The way that we do see this being used often is for either very security conscious people. So if you are an app that likes to appeal to security conscious people, if you're a banking app, having this be an option available for people that are very security conscious that might already have a YubiKey, they are going to love your app, and so it's a way to delight users. But it's also something that we see a lot in terms of like company authentication. And so like, you know, the engineers at your company can get a YubiKey when they onboard because IT is there to hand it to them and they don't have to buy it themselves. And so that physical token becomes available. So as more devices like your phone start to support this standard, you'll see this become more common. So there are a lot of trade-offs in the level of security between these options, but I do think it's really important to note that SMS-based 2FA is still better than no 2FA at all. Especially if you're a user of an application that doesn't support other forms of 2FA, still want to turn this on. Somebody this morning was talking about this as well. It still offers additional levels of security, and a Google study from May of this year actually backs me up on this. So they found that a code sent to an SMS-based recovery phone number helped block 100% of automated bots, 96% of bulk phishing attacks, and 76% of targeted attacks. So that's still pretty good security. Obviously, on the targeted attacks, about 25% of those came through, but you might not be subject to targeted attacks depending on what your company is. However, when you move this up to push authentication, you start to see that the increase of security that's available there, up to 99% of protection against bulk phishing attacks and 90% for targeted attacks. So I want to mention this. There's a super interesting paper that came from a Microsoft researcher named Cormac Hurley back in 2009. And he argues that when non-experts reject security advice, there is often incredibly rational and reasonable reasons. So you want to keep this in mind if you want your users to turn on 2FA, right? Because it's mainly time and not money that users risk when being attacked, but it's also time that security advice asks of them. So you can make 2FA mandatory, but if you don't want to do that, here are some of the other strategies that we've seen folks use to get adoption. You can hide it in the profile settings and just leave it there for people to discover. You could prompt users during onboarding and get a little bit more of people to do it that way. Or you could incentivize it. And so if you played Fortnite, you might remember this. Fortnite became incredibly popular with 2FA because they incentivized users to turn on 2FA, and if they did, they got a free emote. I don't know what an emote is, but apparently people really liked that. And so people turned on 2FA. Companies like MailChimp offer a 10% discount for accounts that turn on 2FA. So there are options that you have for incentivizing your customers here. Applying MFA doesn't have to be the same for all of your users. I mentioned that the goal is not to make the impersonator's time, not to make it worth their time to try to hack your account. And so this applies not just to the business that you're in, but to the users of your account. Like, not all users are created equal. The more high-profile users might have more incentives to hack their account. So Reddit announced a security breach last year that was related to their usage of 2FA. And one of the findings in the report was that we learned that SMS-based 2FA was not secure as we would hope. Cool, we learned that already. So what they said they started doing is requiring token-based 2FA for their employees. So I thought this was kind of interesting because you can start looking at a potential model for how you require or enforce 2FA for different segments of users. So for employees, you can require token-based 2FA. Like I mentioned, this is a little bit easier because IT is provisioning this. For moderators, there's a little bit more incentive for them because they spend more time on Reddit. They understand that time investment. And if you require 2FA for them, they might not be too upset about that. But for everyone else, keep it optional. You could also incentivize this by giving users karma. So that could be an option for Reddit, an incentivizing option for Reddit. And you can apply this to other industries like banking. Use account balances to enforce 2FA. Incentivize people there with actual money. PyPI introduced 2FA recently, and I was talking to somebody that used that, and they were saying that they might require package owners or people that are publishing to PyPI to require them to turn on 2FA. That might make sense. If you're a person who just has an account on PyPI, you might not need 2FA, but in order to publish, maybe require it then. So starting to think about different strata of your users and how you can enforce different options for the different people there. A few additional considerations as we wrap up. Account recovery is a whole different beast that you definitely want to consider as you implement 2FA. We can talk about that later if you have any questions or thoughts. And then think about how you can use 2FA to protect other actions or account changes. Over the phone authentication, there are other things that you can use 2FA for that's not just authentication. And then finally, think about how you want to measure success. There's some things that you can consider. I definitely want to point out support costs related to losses. This might increase your support costs, but overall make that worthwhile based on the amount of money that you save. And there's no one-size-fits-all solution with 2FA, but I just want to leave you with this. I think it's important to consider your business and your users and the trade-offs of the different options that you have. Because like Cormac Hurley says, we exaggerate all dangers. We simply train users to ignore us. I hope I've given you some inspiration for how to think about your authentication systems. Come find me after this if you have any questions. Once again, my name is Kelley Robinson, and thank you for listening.